what does Putin do here? I think the message has to be sent to him to let the Ukrainian people determine their own future, and a partition of Ukraine is totally unacceptable. If I were Vladimir Putin today at the end of the Olympics, I'd be a little nervous, because the people of Russia have watched this transpire, and they're tired of the crony capitalism and kleptocracy that governs Russia today. If I were him, I'd be a little bit nervous.
Welcome back to Morning Joe. Still with us, Mark Halperin, Michael Steele, Thomas Roberts, and Katty Kay. And joining the table, the host of MSNBC's brand new show, The Reid Report, Joy Reid.
Hey.
There you go. And in Washington, let's have a round of applause for him, too. NBC News chief White House correspondent and political director and host of the Daily Rundown, Chuck Todd.
Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah.
Yeah. All right, all right. Katty, how are you this morning?
I'm not going to talk until I get cheers too.
All right.
Katty Kay back from Rio, looking tan.
Thank you.
Hello.
Much
Hello,
better. Well, let's begin in Ukraine, where the former president is now a wanted man, even though he still claims he's in charge. On Saturday, Viktor Yanukovych fled the capital as his own party denounced his actions during the past week. His whereabouts remain unknown. Meanwhile, Parliament took emergency action yesterday, restoring the government and giving its new speaker the power of acting president. Everything moving very fast in the country. The country's military has vowed to stand by and support this new government. The NBC's chief political foreign correspondent Richard Engel takes a look back at these dramatic events.
The revolution began with a fiery miscalculation by the government when last Tuesday, riot police tried to storm a 3-month-old protest camp in the center of Kiev. The demonstrators held their ground, setting bonfires to keep the police at bay. Police couldn't take the square, and by the next morning, they were reduced to throwing stones. The police didn't have much food or shelter either. We saw them exhausted, sleeping on the streets. By day 3, protesters felt they had the upper hand and charged police lines. Then the government made a second tragic mistake. Riot police opened fire, killing nearly 80 demonstrators. In minutes, volunteers converted a nearby hotel into a field hospital.
Yanukovych, with support of Russia, tries to kill Ukraine.
The U.S. and other nations threatened sanctions, and under pressure from Europe, Ukraine's pro-Moscow president Yanukovych agreed to limit his authority and hold new elections by the end of the year. The protesters sensed weakness and chose to push on. They occupied Kiev, starting with the presidential offices. Police abandoned their posts.
So is today your Liberation Day? I hope so.
Yanukovych fled for eastern Ukraine, and demonstrators entered his chalet. Kiev fell without a shot. Hungry for information, people pressed their faces to the gates of Parliament for updates broadcast on loudspeakers. Parliament was taking over the government. For the demonstrators, Yanukovych was a Russian puppet.
I'm not against Russia, just I'm against Putin. Maybe he wants to return USSR or something like that.
This week, Vladimir Putin's realpolitik met 21st century internet politik as Tahrir Square-style siege demonstrations came to Moscow's doorstep, making Russia wonder, will there be more? Is this the start of a Eurasian spring?
Richard Engel reporting there for us from Ukraine. Well, joining us live from London now is NBC News foreign correspondent Ayman Mohyeldin. Ayman, we don't know exactly where President Yanukovych is at the moment, but there's been this kind of tendency over the past few days here to see this as Putin the bad guy, Russia the bad guys, the West the good guys. Actually, in Ukraine, it's a bit more complicated than that, because there are millions of Ukrainians who like Russia, right?
Absolutely. I mean, Ukraine as a country is ethnically diverse. In some parts of the country, there is a large part, if not the full-out majority of certain regions that are ethnically Russian, and they have strong allegiances to Russia. But more importantly, Ukraine historically was a very important industrial base for Russia. So as a country, Russia has a strategic geopolitical importance in that country. A lot of Russia's industries rely on imports from Ukraine. So there is no doubt that there are legitimate numbers or population centers in Ukraine that are loyal to Russia. But at the same time, over the course of the last several years, there has been a shift in the country to a return to authoritarian rule that makes it much more difficult for people across the divide, regardless of the ethnic composition, to be so much in support of what Russia is trying to do there right now.
Chuck, all this has been playing out while we've been watching the Olympics unfold, the pageantry that goes along with that. And this has been such a tragedy to watch as it's unfolded and the escalation that happened. But we know that the president then had that conversation with Vladimir Putin. And basically all of these struggles go back to who the Ukraine and its people want to be governed more in line with. Is it the EU? Is it Russia's stake? Is it Western influence? Explain that phone call between Obama and Putin.
Well, obviously, look, the phone call was about as much about Ukraine as it was about Syria. Don't forget, there was the UN resolution that the United States was very concerned about, having to do with the humanitarian aid. They didn't want Russia to stand in front of that. But there seems to be a real debate in this country having to do, you heard John McCain, who almost believes that the United States needs to realize that Putin does view all of his dealings with the West right now with a Cold War mentality. You have Susan Rice saying we are not going to have a Cold War mentality. That is, we're not going to sit here and horse trade Ukraine for Syria and things like that. But Ayman, I am curious that the challenge, it seems to me, for the West is you've got Putin, who does want to deal with Ukraine in a very black and white way, which is you're either with Russia or you're with the West, that there is no in between. You have the West, including the United States, saying, hey, you can be both, have a relationship with Europe and a traditional cultural and economic relationship with Russia, but it seems as if Putin's not going to allow that.
Joy, we've seen in past...
Yeah, that seems to be the choice that is being put forth by the Western countries, but not so much by Russia. And Russia has made very clear that it feels that it has a strategic interest in Ukraine. And what we saw back in 2008, when a similar situation happened in Georgia, Russia sent in troops by the thousands to protect what it felt was its strategic interest. And throughout the course of this standoff, over the course of the last 3 months, Russia has really been using a carrot and stick approach with the Ukrainian government. They at times would offer the Ukrainian government billions of dollars worth of loans. They would offer them financial incentives to turn away from Europe. But once they felt that the Ukraine was perhaps moving or even indicating that it wanted to go towards Europe, Russia would punish them by cutting off some of that economic incentive. So they are using a very strong approach to make sure that the Ukraine is punished, if you will, for some of these actions. And going forward, it may not be militarily, but certainly Russia is going to use its economic influence over Ukraine to make it very costly for Ukraine for toppling a pro-Moscow president.
Joy, we've seen sometimes during this administration, foreign policy stuff gets in the way. Egypt obviously occupied a lot of time in the Arab Spring. The president wants this to be a year of action. How worried do you think the White House is about this story taking up not just the news, but the president's time?
I mean, I think perhaps less than we might think. I mean, the American people are really a lot more focused, obviously, on domestic concerns. And this is Russia's sphere of influence. Russia has a lot more at stake here in terms of what happens with Ukraine than obviously the United States. And then second would be the European Union. So it's an important issue. It's something that has to be on the table. It's part of what's on the plate of an American president. But this really is about Russia and its sphere of influence, which, you know, for us, it's obviously important because they are central to what we're trying to do in terms of bringing Iran to the table. They're central to trying to stabilize Syria. So any kind of destabilization within the Russian sort of world and orbit does concern the U.S. But I still think primarily the president's got to keep his eye on domestic concerns on the economy.